Mass shootings have become a thing of fear in the recent world. The Australian mass shooter, Martin Bryant, struck a massive chord of fear in the lives of Australians with the Port Arthur Massacre. When were his psychopathic tendencies noticed? What exactly made him want to turn into a mass murderer? Stick around as we dive into these questions. Bryant, the firstborn of Maurice and Carleen Bryant, and born in Tasmania, Australia, was known to be a strange person even from an early age, with an uncontrollable temper and a distant focus. He had a habit of running away from his mother when he was 16 months old, making it challenging for her to raise him. He was a violent and disruptive child who was frequently bullied at school and was known for causing mischief. In one case, he took a snorkel from another boy while they were diving, and in another, he chopped down a neighbor's tree. He was soon suspended from elementary school in 1977 and transferred to a high school special education unit where he continued to worsen academically and behaviorally. Bryant was discovered to have a low IQ of 66 and to be autistic during elementary school. Maurice, his father, gave him an air rifle when he was 14 years old, which Bryant did enjoy using, frequently shooting at a road network from a range and allegedly brutally killing a parrot. Due to his lack of emotion and actual pleasure in searching for the missing Maurice, his father, he was briefly presumed to have murdered his father, but all charges were dismissed when it was discovered that Maurice had committed suicide. Eventually, Bryant met the affluent Helen Harvey, who employed him as her handyman when he was 19 years old. Helen often took Bryant shopping and spent thousands of dollars on him, and the two developed a bond that was sometimes regarded as much more than a professional relationship. Among the items purchased were over 30 cars, all purchased in a time span of less than 3 years. Helen would invite Bryant to live with her after her mother, Hilza, succumbed to poor health caused by the state of the house. The two then relocated to the country, to a small town known as Copping. At this stage, Bryant's actions had become dangerously erratic. Notwithstanding, Bryant lived in peace under Helen's care, despite the fact that their relationship was seen negatively by other residents who had grown to fear Bryant for his bizarre actions. Helen was eventually killed in a fatal car accident on October 20th, 1992, which seemed to have been prompted by Bryant himself. As an outcome of Helen's death, he acquired her estate, as well as a total of 500,000 Australian dollars, which he spent mostly on his numerous trips, all of which took place within a 3-year period, beginning in 1993. Helen's death hit Bryant hard, and he made futile attempts to make new friends, usually with younger children. He also sought psychiatric help and was given prothiodyne, a tricyclic antidepressant. Bryant used at least some of the money to purchase an AR-10 semi-automatic rifle via a Tasmanian newspaper ad in late 1993. He also went on to various other gun shops in search of an AR-15 rifle, which he was eventually able to obtain. He also got an L1A1 self-loading rifle and then a USAS-12 automatic shotgun. Bryant visited the Port Arthur Historic Site just months before the massacre and bought a large sports bag sufficient to hold a large amount of ammunition, meticulously measuring several before purchasing. Bryant's visits to Port Arthur prior to the shooting suggest that the assault was planned. On March 13, 1996, just weeks before the massacre, Thomas Hamilton, a 43-year-old suspected pedophile from the Scottish town of Dunblane, began firing at the Dunblane Primary School, decapitating 16 children and a teacher before committing suicide. Bryant was thought to have acted as a result of the media coverage of the event. Bryant was woken up by his alarm clock at 6 a.m. on April 28, 1996. During post-massacre interviews, his current partner and other relatives mentioned that he had never made use of the alarm clock before. Bryant's girlfriend, who had been staying the night with him, left the residence 2 hours later to visit her parents. Bryant soon followed, carrying his weapons as well as his sports bag, which contained the ammunition. He drove around the neighborhood in his yellow Volvo 244 GL sedan, buying a cigarette lighter, a cup of coffee, a bottle of tomato sauce, and $15 worth of gas. During 2 of the purchases, he informed 2 attendants that he was going surfing, despite the fact that the weather was calm, making surfing conditions exceptionally poor. By 11:45 that morning, Bryant arrived at the Seascape cottage, which his father had tried and failed to purchase previously, only for the property to be purchased first by a husband and wife named David and Noeline Martin, an act that enraged Bryant. Before departing for Port Arthur, he entered the Seascape cottage and killed the Martins. Bryant arrived at Port Arthur around 1:30 p.m., parked his Volvo, and went inside the Broad Arrow Cafe, which happened to have at least 60 to 70 people inside. He began chatting up other visitors while eating a large meal on the outside deck, making comments on European wasps in the place and the lack of Japanese tourists. Bryant returned to the cafe after finishing his meal, went back to his tray, laid aside his sports bag, and then pulled out his AR-15 rifle, spraying bullets on 2 Malaysian tourists, Mo Yi Ying and Su Leng Chung, both of whom were killed instantly. With only 17 rounds fired, 10 more individuals were shot and killed, and an additional 10 were injured, several critically. Bryant then proceeded to the gift shop, where he murdered 8 more people and injured 2 more with the leftover 12 bullets in his magazine. People gathered in the parking lot around the cafe after hearing gunshots, mistaking it for a historical reenactment. Bryant used this opportunity to move outside and began firing on the crowd, killing 4 people and injuring 6 more. At that point, he changed assault weapons to the L1A1 SLR. He then went inside his Volvo, began the engine, and drove 300 yards along the roadway towards the toll booth, with 24 people dead and 18 injured. He noticed a young woman, Nanette Mikak, and her 2 children, Madeline and Alana, and pulled over beside them, stepped out, and held them at gunpoint. He killed Madeline and Nanette right away, while Alana tried to flee. However, Bryant caught up with her and killed her with a single bullet to the neck. Bryant then re-entered his car and drove another 200 yards towards the toll booth, where he was blocked in by a gold BMW. After a brief argument with one of the car's occupants, Bryant killed him, the BMW's driver, and the 2 other occupants before moving several rounds of ammunition, the AR-15, a set of handcuffs, and the container of gasoline he purchased into the BMW. Bryant then drove away in the BMW, having left behind his own car, which still held his USAS-12, as well as hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Bryant drove up to a nearby service station after exiting Port Arthur and cutting off Glenn Pierce and his sweetheart, Zoe Hall's white Toyota Corolla. Bryant approached the Toyota, ordered Pierce out of the vehicle and into the trunk of the BMW, and fired 3 bullets, killing Hall. Bryant left the scene and headed towards Seascape Cottage, where he wounded an additional 4 drivers. By 2 p.m., Bryant had pushed Pierce out of the BMW's trunk and into the cottage, where he cuffed him to a stair rail and set the BMW ablaze with gasoline. Paul Hyland and Gary Whittle, 2 officers responding to the Seascape roadway killings, arrived and were fired upon by Bryant, who pushed them into a nearby ditch. They weren't killed, but each time they tried to move, Bryant would immediately open fire again, trapping them. At first, Bryant pleaded not guilty to all 35 murders charged against him during his trial, but eventually revised his plea to guilty without providing a confession. He was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to 35 consecutive life imprisonment sentences, 1 for every murder victim, plus an additional 1,035 years for attempted murder and causing grievous physical harm to a number of people. he was sentenced to Risdon Prison in Hobart. Bryant is noteworthy for being the first serial killer to be sentenced with no possibility of parole, despite the fact that most murder prison terms allow for parole even after lengthy sentences. Bryant was placed in a specially built cell in the prison's near solitary confinement unit after other inmates stated possible plans to murder him during his incarceration. During his imprisonment and later institutionalization, he tried to commit suicide 8 separate times, the most recent being on March 27, 2007, when he slashed his throat with a razor blade, forcing him to be hospitalized briefly. Bryant's motivation for the massacre continues to remain a closely guarded secret, with only his lawyer privy to the truth. According to a book published by Bryant's lawyer, it seems that the media's attention to the Dunblane massacre urged him to act. It also appears that he merely desired a large number of deceased victims for his own benefit, as he asked repeatedly how many people he had killed during the shooting after his arrest, and was enthralled by the final number of 35. So what do you think that Bryant's motive was? What stood out to you most in his story? We would love to know. Share your thoughts and answers in the comments section below. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.